How's it going, everybody? This is Dailies to Downloads. My name is Chad. With me is Erik. I am clean shaven. Erik is not.
Not
It's
yet, but you know what? I'm starting to hear news about the vaccine, so who
yes,
knows? Maybe soon enough, I'll look like an entirely different person. I'll look 20
yes.
years younger next
You
time
have
you
to
see me.
donate all that stuff, all that hair.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I'd like to make some financial gain, but yeah, maybe I'll donate.
All right. Well, this week we are going to be talking about breaking the fourth wall, and we're going to be talking about some examples that we like, some that we don't. But first, let's talk a little bit about its history in film and what it is specifically. And obviously, when somebody talks about breaking the fourth wall, the convention holds that the audience can see through this invisible wall to the actors performing, and the actors, the convention holds, cannot see the audience. And so breaking the fourth wall occurs when the actors or the cast are looking at the camera or looking into the quote unquote audience
Yeah.
through the fourth wall. So obviously this didn't start in film. This dates back to the 16th century in theater. It's called meta theatrical or meta reference, or you might just call it meta in general these days. But I mean, we've had this for a long time, and it's been done so many times over the years in film and in TV. And the first one of the first earliest recordings of it being done in film, the movie is called Men Who Have Made Love to Me. And let me tell you, making notes for this show at
I've
work
seen a few of those. I
with
don't know
this
if
title, Men Who Have Made Love to Me, could potentially create some awkward exchanges.
well, what year was that?
It's 1918.
Oh, okay, because I saw one with that title from 2019.
You don't own this one, Erik? In
No,
1918,
not,
Men
not
Who...
the 1918. The old Betamax of that one is somewhere in storage.
Yeah, this is a 1918 silent film from Mary McLean, and she is an enigmatic authoress who portrays herself in the movie, and she interrupts some of the vignettes that you see to address the audience directly. So, and it's been done many times. I remember the Marx Brothers doing it in Horse Feathers and Animal Crackers. They did it a couple occasions, and Laurel and Hardy also did it as well. So, Erik, my question to you to get us started here is, what was the first movie you can recall where you noticed that the actor is breaking the fourth wall? Do you remember what the first time you ever noticed something like that was?
Not completely, because I don't think necessarily that it even, usually it feels very organic, right? So it doesn't even, like you mentioned the Marx Brothers, like, yeah, I guess they do break the fourth wall, but it seems such like a natural conversation with the audience that,
They didn't draw
um,
attention to it.
yeah, and I guess that's the point. Like in theater, that seems to be more normal a lot of times,
Well, yeah,
right?
I mean, and
Theater
to
probably,
bring context to the Marx Brothers, they
yeah,
are all people that started in vaudeville. So
yeah, exactly,
I'm sure they
exactly,
were used to it. So when they did it in their movies, it really is nonchalant. I love the Marx Brothers movies, and I was watching back one of the clips of Groucho talking to the audience, and it's very quick. So
hmm
it's kind of seamless the way he does it. And it occurs not just with Groucho, but Chico, I
yeah.
think, does it as well. But yeah, I mean, if in theater it happens a lot. But go ahead.
Yeah, I guess for myself, young enough, it'd probably be like Ferris Bueller. But
That's funny. That's what I was going to say. That's the same with me. That's the first time I ever really noticed it happening. Thinking back, I can't remember a movie I watched before that as a kid where that
yeah,
happened.
and
Even
it's one that's like actually feels like important to the movie. Like,
absolutely right,
you know what I mean? Like a lot of them are usually just throwaway gag things, but
right.
obviously this is, even through, like, after, I remember as a kid too, after the end credits, there's like this extra scene where he comes out, he's like, oh, you guys are still here, what are you doing,
Right.
like, to continue that whole shtick that they're doing from the beginning of breaking the fourth wall. And I guess, like, I didn't know what that meant, and it comes off extremely natural in the movie, obviously.
Right, because you're just
And
kind of along the trip with him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like any scene where he is with anyone else, he's not. They don't. He doesn't do that.
Right.
But it's like seems like in his bedroom or whatever to get the story going, and then at the end, blah blah.
He's not pausing like Zach Morris.
Not that kind of thing. Yeah. So in the moment, I guess the best examples of this are it feels very natural and doesn't. It's not cheap. Well, I guess we'll probably talk about some versions where it probably feels a little cheap to break the fourth
Absolutely.
wall. But there, it actually, I feel like adds to it and is better than just having like a voiceover narration. Um,
Well, it's funny. Like you mentioning narration leads into what I was going to talk about next. And I never thought about narration as a concept that
oh,
was breaking the fourth wall, but it is.
kind of,
It
yeah.
absolutely is. But I never thought about it alongside a Ferris Bueller who's looking at the audience. But narration absolutely is breaking the fourth wall. But you don't really hear about people referring to it in that way. They just
Yeah,
refer to
yeah.
narration as kind of its own thing. So when you look at a movie like The Wolf of Wall Street, which we talked about on another show, there every type of fourth wall break
Hmm.
is in that movie. He addresses the camera head on, he narrates, and then you also hear his inner thoughts,
Hmm.
which is breaking the fourth wall as well. So it's interesting when I was doing research for this that narration it
Yeah.
can accompany this. But so when we talk about some of our good and bad examples, at least for me, I didn't use any narration necessarily.
Yeah, I didn't even think, and I think also with narration too, that seems to be a device that comes from literature, right? Like for if you're reading in
Right.
the first person, that's normal. You
Right.
know you're reading the internal thoughts of someone. You wouldn't. That seems obvious. Um, and I guess that also is something that seems like only film centric, right? Like I don't think you would have narration in theater unless it was someone pre-recorded,
Right.
certain monologues, but that would be weird. That would take away from the live element.
Right.
So yeah, I guess obviously that is not a literal breaking of the fourth wall, I guess, and that
Right.
but yeah, that definitely is in the same vein as speaking directly to us.
Right. So let's talk about some that were good. Disney famously, they break the fourth wall a lot in throughout their history, and it's usually in small doses. And in looking at some lists, some of the films, like I even forgot that they were breaking the fourth wall. Like for instance, in The Lion King, with Timon and Pumbaa, I
Uh,
think one of them is going to fart, and Timon comes on and says, "Hey, not in front of the kids," and
uh,
they look at the camera, and I totally forgot about that. And
yeah.
the shorter these instances are, it's almost the better they're used because they are seamless and they are very natural, and you don't think too much about it. It doesn't take you out of the moment. If it's in Disney did that a lot, but the first one I'll talk about is Pinocchio from 1940, which is Jiminy Cricket coming on and introducing the
Hmm.
story and turning the book, which was a very famous scene that Disney would use throughout all of his adaptations. They would always have the book open up, and that's what happens here. And he's talking directly to us. So that's one that I wrote down that I always thought would worked very well. So I don't know, Eric, what do you think? Is there one that you like?
Well, I guess thinking about it for like children's entertainment, I guess that even that seems very vaudevillian, right?
Sure.
Because then I think of like the Muppets. Like the Muppets would do that kind of stuff all the time. Like
Right.
would speak directly, and you wouldn't. I don't know. Like maybe subconsciously I registered it in my head, but I probably wouldn't even know what that. You know what I mean? Like it's all coming at
Mhm.
you so quickly that I don't even know if I knew that Kermit was talking directly to me, or maybe I did and I didn't even think anything of it. Where and then there are some examples where I feel like it was kind of like Shrek and stuff, where it was kind of like beaten into the ground.
Yeah.
Um, um, yeah, I feel like animation is one where it's a lot more of a loose standard, perhaps, and
Yeah.
it's an easy like, I mean, like Family Guy and stuff. I feel like has also like killed that sort of thing.
Right.
Not that that's for kids, but just in animation, so, where it can kind of be used to like get something over, quote unquote, over in a very easy.
Well,
way.
what do they call that type of humor? Like the South Park did a whole episode, and I listened to their commentary. I think that like interchangeable jokes, I think is what they
Yeah.
call it, something along those lines, because they just talked about how they didn't at the time anyway. This is many years ago, so it's not like this feud is still going. But they talked about how they didn't respect the Family Guy writers in terms of writing because you could literally just put any type of joke into any plot because it had nothing to do with what was going on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, so
It was so non sequitur, whatever
like
this.
yeah, like self-referential a lot of times, and
Yeah,
very pop culture referencey type
yeah,
stuff.
you're right. It would be like, oh, this reminds me of the time I ran into Sylvester Stallone in a
Right,
brothel,
exactly,
and they
yeah,
cut to it. It has nothing to do with anything, but it's like,
right.
okay, well, I guess that's weird, so I'll laugh at that. But it's kind of yeah, it's cheap. It's
I
like
think
not
it's
that.
why a lot of people, when they think back to stuff like that, especially Family Guy, is you'll hear people talk about funny moments, but
Mhm.
you will
Yeah,
very rarely hear about, oh, this is a really great episode of Family Guy.
yeah,
Almost
because
never.
because that is the kind of thing that is all in a way breaking the fourth wall. There's no
Right.
like yeah, there are plots, but the plots are just window dressing to hang these these
Right.
little gags onto. Um, but those yeah, those are the ones where think back to Pinocchio and all those things. Like I feel like Disney was maybe a little bit more I don't know classy about it, but I'm just off the examples that I can
There's
think of.
times they did it that weren't
Yeah,
necessary. Like I think they did it in Mulan,
really.
at one point, and which was just kind of not necessary. There's times, and I think there's few examples that I can think of where the use of breaking the fourth wall made me hate it. But a lot of times, the worst examples to me are the ones that you just forget, that
Hmm.
aren't very noticeable. I feel like in a weird way, like if you want to notice those moments, you want them to stick out in your head, but at the same
Yeah,
time, you don't want them to take you out of the movie or the story.
and yeah, and I feel like it. I don't know if it would be say used as like a last resort only, but there are times where I would imagine like yeah, if you don't notice it and it doesn't seem to serve any reason for being there, most likely it'll be cut out. I'd
Right.
imagine. Like one that I was thinking of when you mentioned Wolf of Wall Street, there is a typical standard breaking of the fourth wall in Goodfellas at the
Yep.
end when he's in the
Yep.
courtroom. And of course, we're getting the narration throughout the entire film,
Right.
but only in that one scene towards the end does he address the actual camera,
Right.
speak directly to us, and I like it. It definitely feels weird because that's the only time it happens. And
The way it's used in that movie is really good because it's way at the end.
yeah, 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 and obviously, like, yeah, if we're saying that breaking the fourth wall can also include narration, then it is kind of a progression of
Right.
Henry Hill speaking to us, so it makes sense. And there, it really stood out because it addresses also like the artifice of everything else around you, right? Which you're
Right.
not expecting a movie to do when you're over 2 hours into it. You're like, what the? Huh? So that was a good example. Wolf of Wall Street is so many different kinds of everything coming
Yeah.
at you that it can't really break any rules because it's not necessarily following rules even from the beginning. The
Right.
freeze
Well said.
frames, the random asides, and everything else. Like it is kind of going by its own language.
Absolutely. So we mentioned Ferris Bueller from 1986, John Hughes. That's obviously a very famous example, and I think with that one, he uses it throughout the whole movie. And I think when I was looking at all the different versions of breaking the fourth wall in film, it seems that it's riskier the longer you go with it. The more you do it and the longer the circumstances are that you're using it, it can be a lot riskier because then you risk the character coming across a certain way, maybe smarmy or conceited or whatever the quality might be that makes you not like what you're watching. And obviously, and this wasn't necessarily on my list of some of my favorites, even though I like the movie a lot. The poster boy for breaking the fourth wall these days would probably be Deadpool. He,
Yeah,
that's kind of how that character is famous. I mean, he makes
yeah,
self-referential jokes and, takes you out of the comics and that kind of thing. And that's one of the reasons
yeah.
people like that movie so much, that franchise so much.
And like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I imagine in comics too, there's also a more uh there is more breaking of the fourth wall. Like, does Spider-Man ever do that in the comics as well? I feel like he has.
I'm sure it's like I
But
know. So Marvel is like has Deadpool under their umbrella, and in DC, I know it's not a famous character. I think his name is Ambush Bug or something along those lines. And he was similar to Deadpool in that way. He might have predated Deadpool. You know, if somebody's watching this and they know the answer, they might correct us. But you know, so like, in comics, I feel like that has happened a lot. But you know, I don't know. You probably see somebody like Spider-Man do it, you know, from time to time. Maybe not, but it would be characters that have a comical sensibility to them.
yeah, yeah,
I don't know that Batman did it that much, if at all.
yeah, yeah. And I feel like there's also like an everyman quality to those things.
Right,
Like, perhaps some writers use it because they can't find another way to like express this person's internal whatever. I don't know.
right.
So in a way, like breaking of the fourth wall is an easy fix to get that across. In the example of Deadpool, it's obviously because he is somewhat of a stand-up insult comic, by
Right.
nature of his character. So
Right.
like that is an important part, and also the artifice of these comic book movies that normally when someone gets shot in the head, they don't survive in real life. But
I
they,
mean, 9 times out of 10, this is always used in like a comedic movie. You know, I
yes,
mean, it has happened in movies that are serious, as we'll talk about, but
yeah.
most of the time it occurs in comedies, and certainly even if it's a movie that's a drama or action, it would occur in a comedic sense. So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah. Now that we're thinking over the examples, I feel like there's actually so much more you could do with that isn't done. Uh,
yeah.
it shouldn't be necessary for it to be used only in comedic circumstances, but that does seem
Well,
to be. That's
one that was used in not a comedic sense, and I don't know if you came across this when you were looking it up, is Funny Games.
now. Yes. Now, yeah.
I
This
mean,
was the one.
the rewind part
Yeah.
of that movie specifically is you know, I mean, that is not, despite the title, is not a humorous movie in any way.
Look, I paid to see a movie called Funny Games. It was not funny. There were no games. What the hell's going on? Uh, yes, and that I feel like is going to get a visceral reaction, just because that's one where there are no precursor hints at this that's happening,
Right.
and after it builds to the murder of our main characters, who we've come to kind of sort of identify with, the movie just kind of stops and the villains address the camera.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. The villains are the ones who are like almost killed, and then they stop it, right?
It looks like it's going to be a happy ending.
Right, and
And
then
then
they
they pull
stop it reversed.
Mr. Honeck pulls the rug
Yeah,
out from under us. It rewinds it.
yeah.
If I went downstairs and showed my wife that movie right now, she's never seen it. She would afterwards. She would be like, "WTF? Like, what? Why did you show me this?"
Yeah, I mean, and I just feel like maybe it's successful at doing this, but to what end? Like, it's frustrating. It's meant to be frustrating.
Mhm.
So I was frustrated. Like,
Right.
okay, congratulations, you succeed. Like, I still don't get but then then I'm checked out for the next hour,
Right.
where like I'm like the whole idea where it's, oh guys, it's just a movie. Like, wow, oh shit, I didn't realize that. I thought I was living in it. It's like
Right.
that one felt like it was too much in love with its own cleverness about that. Um, and so what if it is actually about the betraying of the audience expectations? It's like not as clever or deep of a thesis as I feel like the movie makes it out to be. So, and
Right.
I'm
Right.
sure that angered a lot of people when that one came out, and it was remade in English,
Shot for shot.
and they kept the exact same thing. Kept the
Yep.
exact same thing. That was,
So another one that came to mind that I like a lot, and I always associate it with breaking the fourth wall, is Wayne's World from
yeah,
1992, and obviously the Wayne's World 2 did it as well. But the first one was more well known, I think, for that reason. And obviously, he addresses the audience many times, and they change the endings. And again, this is a comedy, and it's done really well. I mean, Wayne's World is a movie that I hold close to my heart. It reminds me of my teenage years. So
Yeah. And it isn't Wayne's World. It's been a very long time since I've seen it, but like, isn't also the initial origin of the sketch that they're like hosting a public access show,
yeah,
right? Yeah. So in a sense, they're already addressing the audience by way of being on this show, right?
in
So
in a weird way, yeah. I mean, he kind of walks around his house and stuff like that. But you're right. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
they're already kind of doing a show. Yeah,
yeah. So I guess like there it feels much more organic, and that seems to
right.
be, um, yeah. I mean, Wayne's
So
World.
I'm surprised you haven't mentioned Annie Hall yet.
I'm sorry, I don't know who made that. I don't know that. No, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, but that also I think Annie Hall is like also within the vein of like Marx Brothers, same kind of
Sure.
way, and that most famously in Annie Hall would probably be the movie theater line, when they're waiting online, the movie theater. Granted, the whole movie is a lot of breaking of the fourth wall, but I feel like the movie theater, Marshall McLuhan
Yeah,
scene.
they pull him into the scene.
Yeah,
The guy behind him is criticizing, and he says, "Wouldn't it be nice if you could just have the critic right there, or the
yeah,
author, or whoever right there?"
yeah. And that's I mean that's a great example of again, it doesn't really have anything to do with the movie. Uh
No, not
like
really.
you can literally just take that 3-minute scene and it's its
Right.
own movie.
Yep.
And or you could take it out of the movie and it wouldn't change anything. Um but there are a lot of scenes. It's also like a voiceover narration throughout. It opens with him addressing the camera, talking about his childhood, and then everything else is off limits. I mean, there's animation randomly,
Hmm.
the split screens with the therapists and their sex lives and all that stuff.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I guess that would be a good example. And I feel like he's done that in other films as well. I'm
Hmm.
blanking on certain examples now. But definitely, if not breaking up the fourth wall, like remember in Match Point, um, after the older woman, the mother or whatever is dead, and she comes back to life or whatever. Like it's a weird. I don't know if that would
I have to
count.
watch that one again.
Yeah, it's actually it's been like 15 years I guess since I've seen it, but I also remember it does play with that form. That would stand out and be somewhat abnormal. But
Right.
yeah, but Annie Hall is a famous example.
And obviously, we can't talk about every single movie that broke the fourth wall, but there's some, more famous examples. Amelie,
Hmm.
they did it in that one, which is a terrific film. They also did it in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. They actually did it. Monty Python did it a lot, but
Yeah.
the one in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I guess originally in the VHS, the scene was cut where the woman addresses the audience, and then they put it back in when the DVDs started to come out. But and they eventually, like in that scene, it's funny, everybody's telling her to move along because she's addressing the audience. So
Mel Brooks, I guess. Mel
yeah,
Brooks.
Blazing Saddles, they call that scene the French Mistake.
Yeah. What they
Yeah,
call
which is funny. And so obviously not every single movie has done it in a good way. So I'll mention one that came to mind right off the bat. And I like Kevin Smith, but what started to take me down a notch from being as far as my being passionate in his movies is Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back from 2001. There's a scene where they go to visit one of Ben Affleck's characters, and they started talking about who would pay money to see such and such, and they look at the audience because they're referring to the movie that everybody's watching. And I just thought it didn't make sense. It didn't fit in with the movies in the past that
Yeah.
Kevin Smith had done. I didn't like that movie in general, but I really thought that was, I mean, he did it again in Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. And I like that movie's a little bit better. I like that movie, but I thought that the use of the breaking the fourth wall in that case didn't add anything to me. But what do you think, Eric? Is there any that come to mind that you didn't like?
What I don't Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think if it's because of the breaking of the fourth wall, or if there are other reasons why I didn't particularly like these certain films. But the works of Adam McKay, Vice, and The Big Short, it just seems like weirdly placed, and
Right.
also and also like unnecessarily so. Sometimes it feels like they're trying to do a Scorsese kind of thing, but
Right.
it doesn't work as well. And yeah, Vice does that a lot, where Dick Cheney will just start speaking to us, or they'll rewind something or whatever. And in my opinion, it didn't really add anything to the movie. It just
And
seemed
what you said about Scorsese, I think Goodfellas specifically was a big influence in that way.
yeah,
Obviously,
yeah,
Scorsese in general is an influence on filmmakers, but that type of thing, it can be done in good and bad ways. It really can. Like, I remember, like, even despite the fact that I like some of Adam McKay's movies, you're right in that the times that he does it, it doesn't add anything. There's
yeah.
another Scorsese like or Goodfellas like moment with looking at the camera and narration in Lord of War, which is a movie that I like a lot. And it reminds, thinking back on it now, it does remind me exactly of Goodfellas, the way it's done in that one. But yeah, it can be done in a less than ideal way, or it feels like they're doing it unnecessarily, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I just feel like it's a way to like also try to, I don't know, a cheap way to kind of like hold on to audiences' attention, or point out the artifice of motion pictures, which again is not something that is, and no one is fooled, no one is confused that they're watching a movie. And it usually, I also think that those sensibilities do tend to work better for comedy. So
Yep.
when it is The Big Short and Margot Robbie's in a bathtub who's just going to start talking to us about economic housing bubbles or whatever the hell,
Right.
it feels kind of stupid. And then it's
Like, I understand what he was trying to do, but
yeah,
I there were probably other ways. you know
yeah. That was the most like, I guess, quote unquote prestigious.
Tarantino, I guess, kind of does it from time to time. Like, I mean, in Glorious Bastards, there's that weird tangent where Samuel L. Jackson talks about the type of film being used and how flammable it is, which
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess in a way is breaking the fourth wall indirectly to kind of let us know a piece of information that we might not know.
yeah, yeah. And even in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, who is it's Kurt Russell doing the narration, or if you want to call it narration, it's these weird moments that I don't really think work either. Where it's just Kurt Russell like filling us in on certain things about
Right.
Brad Pitt murdered his wife or didn't, or blah blah blah. And yeah, that also doesn't really mean anything to me. It doesn't really work in the context. But I'm trying to think of
Do you
any.
remember?
Yeah,
Do you remember Hulk Hogan doing it in Gremlins 2?
well, I feel like Gremlins too. I feel like 90% of that movie is breaking of the fourth wall. I feel
Yeah.
like the Tony Randall sounding Gremlin and whatever. I feel like at that point they like Joe Dante just threw all rules and sensibilities to the wind to just have it be its own
That was
cartoon.
his Wolf of Wall Street. He was doing anything.
I mean, isn't Gremlins? Does Gremlins 2 also take place on Wall Street? It's pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, New York City, right? Yeah.
I
So,
mean, it's as accurate of a depiction of Wall Street as I've ever, you know, come across.
um, another one, and I need to watch this movie again because it's been a long time since I've seen it. But in looking at this and thinking back to it, I didn't really think it added anything. Fight Club did it as well.
Yeah,
He refers
yeah,
to
yeah.
cigarette burns at one point, and he like points, to it, up on the screen. So again, there's times that people have done it that it doesn't add anything. Um,
And in that film too, I feel like it's because there's a big twist, right? It's an unreliable narrator that turns out to be whatever it turns out to
right.
be. So in that sense, I don't know, it seems maybe a little bit justified in that it's also pulling over the wool over your eyes about the sanity of the
True.
main character, perhaps.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. So other movies that we might not have mentioned. American Psycho,
Yeah.
Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which is one that I think is underrated, not necessarily for the breaking of the fourth wall, but he does that certainly. Robert Downey Jr. JCVD. Have you ever seen that movie, Eric?
No, I mean I haven't I've not seen it, but I remember when it came out. But I
Yeah, it was. It got some brief popularity because of Jean-Claude Van Damme's monologue in it towards the end.
wasn't that kind of like his the wrestler, I guess, or like
It was around that same time. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It didn't. It
It
didn't
didn't
get
come
him an
anywhere
Oscar,
close to the success of that movie, but yeah.
but yeah. So, are there any others, Eric, that you can think of that you should have then mentioned that we should have mentioned?
Um, well, I guess some of the easiest ones, because you mentioned going how far, how many hundreds of years back it goes, is that, and I think it kind of works in film adaptations as well, is for Shakespeare, where there was always
Right.
breaking the fourth wall. And in theater, and for Shakespeare's time, if Richard III is going to lay out his evil plan to us, and then he goes and does it, like it seemed normal. And like when you see Shakespeare adaptations for film, it still kind of works. I mean, it doesn't work as well probably as if you see it on the stage, because I do think that film is almost cursed to me to like having a extra level of authenticity, whether or not that's bogus or not, whatever. But I'm trying to think of like, when you see Hamlet with like Ethan Hawke, right?
Right.
And he's doing the monologue in Blockbuster Video, to be or not to be or whatever. It doesn't work as well in film as it probably does on stage.
Right.
I guess because it's so unnatural that I don't know if people watching
Is it something that
Shakespeare.
you generally like when you watch movies, or which it depends on the circumstance? Or, I would say if it's used rarely enough, if it's not used all the time and it's used in the right circumstance, then I think it can be cool and funny.
Yeah,
But if it's overused, I tend not to like it, which is why I think they need to be careful with the Deadpool franchise. Obviously, it's something that people really like with that character, but they need to use it in wise ways in that movie and not make it overdone. But,
yeah, and you can definitely tell when like like one thing I try, speaking of Fincher, like I tried watching this and I could not get into it for like breaking up the fourth wall reasons. House of Cards. Um,
yeah, yeah. In terms of television,
it
absolutely, that's
was
a popular one. Yeah.
to me that was so lame. The
Mm.
way like he would break the fourth wall in every episode for these monologues, and to like that is like the hook of the show. And I mean, I didn't get so far, but like from what
Right.
I've seen, it seemed like the hook of the show, and it just seemed kind of phony to me. And
There were
not
times in that show that I liked it, and then
yeah,
there's other times that it became almost a Zach Morris pause type thing because he
yeah,
would be in the middle of a moment and he'd look at the audience and say something.
yeah,
And
and
but
that was like real fan service at that
yeah,
point.
they flirted with doing it way too much
Yeah,
in that series.
yeah. Um,
But yeah, we don't have to worry about that series anymore.
yeah, that's another one. But yeah. I mean, again, like every situation is different. I usually, I guess, prefer that they don't, because it's
Right.
usually as we described, it's usually done worse than it is done well. I don't mind things being self-referential, um, like Scream, those kind of movies that are not
Right.
breaking the fourth wall, but are obviously poking fun at themselves, and that's part of the narrative of the movie.
On her, one of the James Bond movies did a self-referential moment on Her Majesty's Secret Service with the one that starred George Lazenby, which is also one of my favorites. But that one, at one point, there's stuff is happening to him, and he's like, "Oh man, this didn't happen with the other fellow." Which at the time, and I'm like, some people really were up in arms about it, and either didn't like it, but it was just like an offhanded joke, like it really
yeah,
was.
yeah,
I mean, because Sean Connery wasn't there anymore.
yeah.
But yeah,
That's okay. I mean, it's lame, but
stuff like that is it's harmless, and that's the word I forgot to say earlier. If it's harmless, like in a lot of Disney movies, then who cares? It can be funny or give a chuckle or whatever.
yeah,
But
yeah, and it does usually come back to the comedic sensibility. Like Freddy Krueger, I think he broke the fourth wall for most of his on-screen appearances. Like if it's done as like a Catskills comedian kind of vibe, I feel like we're willing to extend the benefit of the doubt because it's part of the shtick, I guess.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we thank you for joining us for talking about breaking the fourth wall. We always break the fourth wall on this show.
I was gonna say, like, I guess we're just completely breaking the fourth. We don't even believe in the first, second, or third walls.
Yeah.
We speak directly to you at all times.
If we were like looking this way and talking to each other, that would
but we don't acknowledge that we're even being recorded. That would be
all of a sudden in a future episode we'll be like, oh wait, can other people see this?
This episode is just a meta criticism of a surveillance state, and
I wish I had the technology to walk out of my screen.
It just shuts off.
And it would just be me walking out and be like, oh man, don't you hate it when these people on YouTube?
You gotta go like time out, and then like I'll freeze.
We'll work on that. We'll work on that. All right. Well, we thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week.